been discussing Buddhism for daily life for the past 4 days, and this is the fifth day. And I wanted to tell you something that Buddhism, when it was originally founded by Buddha, it was a period. In fact, it is called the Axial Age, where a lot of people were looking for something called enlightenment. And enlightenment and Buddhism for daily life differs in a few ways. Now, how does that happen? People who were looking for enlightenment, they had a deeply rooted existential problem that they were seeking an answer for. But on the other hand, if we take the society in general, our needs are not the same. How do we know that they are different? The best way to know is that if you go onto a supermarket or a marketplace on a Black Friday, you will see how people are desirous, how they go on trying to buy the items which are on sale, and when they cannot purchase them, they would be heartbroken. For that, they need a solace. Now, that is Buddhism, of course, gives an answer. Buddhism, of course, gives a solace to that problem as well. However, that is not the original cause or the original reason that Buddhism was developed in the first place, or Buddha founded enlightenment. Now, having said that, it somewhat it sort of reminds me of the petroleum industry. Now, petroleum industry, we have petroleum in Canada, we have petroleum in the Middle East. If you take the whole petroleum industry, that industry's primary objective is mining and extracting oil and gas, which means diesel, petrol, kerosene oil. Those are the main products that petroleum industry is used for. However, in petroleum industry, you will find a whole lot of other byproducts which are crucial, which are essential to the daily life. Now, for example, plastic or asphalt, tar, bitumen, they are all byproducts of the whole petroleum extraction process. Now, if you take your life right now, unless you are driving a car at the moment, the most essential thing which is around you right now is plastic, which is a byproduct of the petroleum industry. However, the original petroleum industry was not for that. The original petroleum industry was to extract and mine and extract fuel, gas. But we have plastic around us which we use. So similarly, although the original idea of Buddhism was for enlightenment, or what is known as moksha, a gross translation for that is liberation. Even though the original idea was that, we have to use Buddhism for our daily life. So what I am speaking right now is a version of Buddhism which can be used for our day-to-day practical life, which is the normal life, non-celibacy based, the secular normal lifestyle. So Buddhism also has a big portion which is like in an iceberg. You don't see that usually. So that portion is all directed towards enlightenment. So in this discourse, we are not going to dwell deep into that discussion. However, we are going to use a very practical approach in how to use certain concepts which are profound, of course, and try to see how we can use that for our daily life. So the key difference is that Buddhism is not used to merely find a solace. It goes beyond solace. But however, solace is very good if you have troubled mind. And if you do not know how to have fun because you are inhibited by so many things, we reduce our inhibition, we find our solace. That's more than enough through the Buddhism for daily life series of discussion. So how do we find this solace and be less inhibited is firstly that we try to understand what's the purpose of our existence. That's number one. And then number two is we try to see what is the mechanism of this whole existential routine. Now, I'm not trying to give you a theory of this is the mechanism, but I want you to find it out for yourself. So this whole discussion is going to be around becoming more aware of yourself. It's not me telling this is what's happening, but I'm just making eye-opening statements. I'm just pointing things out, and if they fit, if you really think that they are that is what really happens practically, then you can grab it or you can understand it. So I'm not trying to push you a theory or shove down a technical terminology book, but I'm trying to show you as it is, and it's up to you to see if it's real. It's very important that you see if it's real without believing me or trusting me. That's very important too. Do not trust me, just check if it's valid. So after this validation, after this check, we can use it for our daily life. So what we have been discussing is that we have been discussing the nature of existence. And we have been, when I say existence, we have been primarily looking at the internal nature, but we also see the external nature of things. Like for example, everything is subjected to decay, impermanence. That's a nature which we find in the external world or the physical world. Also, we were looking more towards the internal world because most of us, we know the external world better than the internal world. And what we do not know is the internal world. What is really cooking up inside. But we know what's happening outside. We know how things work. We know how the weather changes, how bacteria and prebiotics and probiotics, vitamins, we know all that. But what we don't know is how our mind works. So our focus is again towards internal nature of our existence more than the external nature. And in this internal nature of existence, we figured out that our mind sits on fundamentally two things: reward and punishment. It revolves around the reward and punishment, positivity, negativity. So we have desires to things which are positive, things which makes us happy, and then we have a repulsion and aversion for things that do not make us happy. Simple as that. So we have likes and dislikes. We want to cling on to our likes while we want to push away, we want to keep them at our arm's length, the dislikes. So these likes and dislikes, we discussed that they are very conceptual in nature, which means that like and a dislike of a person does not really depend on the external environment or the physical world, but it rather sits as a concept. Classic example, a dish of meat. Snake meat is not a dish in the Western world, however it is a cuisine in the Oriental Far East world. So likes and dislikes are very conceptual, that we discovered. And then we also discovered that our mind has two sides, but usually we only see one side of that. Our mind is like a coin. When we flip a coin, we can get two outcomes, heads or tails. However, we only think that it could give one outcome and then we flip coins. But essentially our mind has two natures, a clinging likeness on one hand and an aversion and a dislike on the other hand. And out of what we discussed, we also brought out a lot of examples, and we discussed that how pleasure is not sourced from outside. For a normal person, it would seem like pleasure is obviously sourced from outside through the 4 P's: people, possessions, pastimes, and places. So these are the sources of pleasure. However, we discussed that we do not source pleasure from outside, but we source a stimulation. Pleasure is created inside. And we also discussed that happiness is related to hope. We gave a proper word for that: pleasure and desire. And we discussed the hope or the desire part in length, and then we discussed that, or at least you can see that we do not do anything without a hope or a desire or a motivation. Simple example, when you go to the kitchen and when you open the refrigerator, do you open it just because you have to? You always have an intention why I should be opening that refrigerator. So we do every single activity in our daily life with an intention, with a hope, with a desire. There are things that you don't do with the desire or a particular intention also. If you can think of an example, very simple example would be breathing. You don't do it because you have an ultimate goal of breathing. Probably you have, but at least you are not aware of it. Your heartbeat, they are just involuntary activities which just happens, like the weather. That's not our intention, they just happen. But all the other things that you do volitionally, they are all with a desire, with an intention, and there's a hope, ultimate goal behind what you do. So if you look at why do we do what we do, you will find all the motivations behind why do we do what we do. So then we also saw that in these hopes and desires we make, all the expectations we make, there are justifiable expectations, justifiable hopes, and there are certain hopes which are not justifiable. What do I mean by that? When I go to the refrigerator and when I open the door, I would have a hope that there would be a dessert I like in that, or the food that I loaded the previous day, previous week. But I do not expect an elephant to be inside the refrigerator. Now that is totally unjustifiable. How can an elephant be inside the refrigerator? I don't think about that. In fact, me saying that sounds very stupid. It doesn't sound right, right? So we always have expectations unknowingly. Our cunning mind, our tricky mind, it always has expectations which are justified. Now, what's wrong with these justified expectations? Now, what are the justified expectations? We want our kids to be learning properly, finding a good partner, getting married, and then being a better person in life. We want our vehicle to be not broken, vehicle to run smoothly forever, and we want a better vehicle. We have our materialistic needs. We want to go fishing, we want to go meditate, we want to be enlightened. So we have our hopes like that. But we do not have hopes like I want the sun to set from south every day, or I want the sun to never set, or I want sun to be totally out. I want 2 moons in the sky. We don't have hopes like that because they are not simply justifiable. I do not wish to have an elephant when I open the refrigerator, but I wish to have food inside that. So you see that certain hopes are justifiable, certain hopes are not justified. They cannot be simply validated. Now, how do we get to the hopes that are justifiable? There's fundamentally something wrong with the way that we do this justification. Why do I say that? For this justification, we need knowledge. How do we find knowledge? Is through our 5 senses. Through our eye, ear, nose, etc. We find our information. This information is then processed by the 6th element or the 6th sense, which is called the mind. Not the 6th sense in the usual 6th sense of, not that 6th sense, but the 6th sense in Buddhism is simply the mind, the mental activity. So this each sense, each perception or each sensory perception equipment has its own limitation. Why? We discussed last week that I can only see a small strip of the whole electromagnetic wave. It cannot see ultraviolet, it cannot see infrared, it can only see the colors, yellow, blue, magenta, indigo, etc. That's all the eye can see. The ear can only hear 20 to 20,000 hertz of sound. Rest we cannot hear. It's simply not in our radar. Same thing goes to our nose, to our tongue, to our bodily haptic sensation. But what about our mind? Mind also has a limitation. Mind also cannot think of certain things. Now I'll give you an example. Usually, mind can think of anything. Some creative minds can think better than uncreative minds. But usually, our mind can think of usually anything. But even our mind has a limitation. Now I'll give you an example for that. If you have a 3D object and when you project it to a plane or piece of paper, you get a 2D object. So classic example is that if you take a photo of a 3D element, the photo is 2D. So we can say the 3D that we see is actually a projection of 4 dimensions. Now if you do physics, that might sound familiar. 2D is the reflection of a 3D element. So 3D should be the reflection of a 4D element. However, not 4D in the sense of space-time, but if we have to think of another dimension of 4D, we simply cannot understand that. Our mind cannot process 4D. And there are many things like that. If you especially get into the physics world, there are many things that our mind really simply cannot fathom. So there are things that our mind cannot process. For example, If you ask, how does a God look like? We can only humanify God. The God we know has to have a mouth, uh, has to have a nose, eyes, ears. He has to look like us. The closest, if you look into the cultures of India, you find various type of gods. Certain gods have a elephant head, and they have a human body and an elephant head. So you find all type of gods, but still it's a hybrid of animals and human, or something which is known to us. The closest we have seen something to a different god is in one of these movies, the Transformer movies. In that movie Transformer, which is a fictional sci-fi movie, you find this alien which is like a vehicle, which is quite different to the normal aliens we see, because all the aliens we know, they have eyes, ears, long limbs, etc. So at least in Transformer we see vehicles, but still that is something we know. So we simply cannot understand something we haven't seen. For example, heaven and God. Most of us haven't seen heaven and God, so we simply cannot understand what it looks like. We cannot understand what 4D looks like, 5D looks like, etc. So, with that equipment of mind, where we have a range of sensing, range of contemplating, and range of stimulations, we take decisions, and these decisions are bound to be, these judgments are bound to be wrong. So because of the limitation of the equipment, our information flow is limited, our manipulation of information is limited, hence our judgments could be most of the time limited, they could be wrong. So hence our hopes which are based on these judgments can be very wrong. The second thing is, the hopes are very much related to controllability. And controllability is very much related to ownership. I gave an example the other day. We don't try to control the sun and the moon because we simply cannot. But we try to control Canada. How? We have a voting right. We can give our vote and we can make pressure to change the constitution of Canada, the ruling of the Canada, etc. We can change our neighborhood. We can tell the mayor, we can tell the politicians, the authorities that please change our neighborhood. We can tell the owner of the house or the head of the house, head of the family, to change my house. If I don't like this particular color, I can ask my head monk, or if you're a kid, you can ask your father. If you're a husband, you can ask your wife, shall we change the color? Usually you can do that. And I can change my own bed. If I don't like the pillow, I can simply throw away that pillow, or I can sleep without a pillow. So I can do certain changes. I can control. However, you see that hopes or justifiable hopes, at least the hopes that we tend to justify, validate, they are quite linked with the controllability. But quite different, quite counterintuitively. What can we really control in this world? Do we have full freedom, full controllability, full ownership over anything? Not just a thing, do we have controllability or ownership over anything, including myself? Do I have controllability over my body? Do I really have ownership over my body? We don't. I was working in Saudi Arabia. There's this sort of not so nice custom there. When you go as a professional, you still have to hand over your passport. Now, I find it modern day slavery, white collar slavery, because you have to simply turn over your passport, and without the consent of the government, you cannot simply leave that country. Now, usually you need a visa to enter the country, but even to exit the country, you need a visa. So I found that it to be quite slavery in modern days. Forget that type of slavery. Aren't most of you a slave of your corporate office? You are a slave of your own lifestyle. Even if you want to get out and do what makes you happy, you simply cannot, because you have your mortgages, you have your duties, you simply cannot get out like that. So in a way, we are slaved. Our control is not really with us, it's with someone else. We think we are really in control, but it's probably the China who's controlling us. How? Through their supply chain. When COVID happened, when the supply chain got blocked, we could not open many things. So do we really have controllability in our life? But is it that we have a partial control of our life? Now, if I say I'm completely without control, that is also not right. Now, I have a mouse here, I can lift it, I can move the mouse, I can move the cursor, so I have controllability. But would I have controllability if all of a sudden the power went off or the computer fried? If that happens, I cannot control that. So you see, I have a control, but it's only a partial control. So we took the Uber car. Uber car, it's my Uber ride. However, the Uber company, the driver, the traffic police, they all control it. It's also like a timeshare. You know the timeshares, there are timeshare apartments, timeshare vacation houses. We have a share of it, not the full control of it. Actually, if you really think about it, our public roads are also timeshare. It's that it's not shared with few people, it's shared with many people. So our country, public, is also another timeshare. We have shared ownership. Lake Ontario is a timeshare. Everyone has ownership, and everyone cannot get into Lake Ontario whenever they want to. That's also there. So our hopes are based on this unjustifiable knowledge, or knowledge that we fully cannot fathom. The second thing is our hopes are made thinking that we have control over our hopes. However, we do not have full control, neither full ownership of over our hopes. So expectations are fundamentally wrong. Now, why am I saying this, that expectations are fundamentally wrong? The previous week we were discussing about how expectations could be shattered. And why do expectations get shattered? It's the same reason why people get divorced. People get divorced because they marry. Expectations shatter because we make expectations. So fundamentally the expectations that we make are wrong. And shattering of hope, shattering of expectation is completely a natural process. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It's like flipping a coin. Sometimes you get what you ask for, heads. Sometimes you simply don't get it. So it's a very natural process. Now, when I say the fundamental mechanism of making expectation is wrong, does that make you have to stop making expectations? I do not mean that. Even if I mean that, you would not be simply able to do that. Why? Whenever you go and open the fridge, you still have an expectation. So the more important thing is not to be nihilistic. Now there's a blame over Buddhism that it's a very nihilistic religion. It is not a nihilistic religion. What you need to do is you make expectations, but you see both sides of the coin. Instead of only seeing one side of the coin, we see both sides. So when we make an expectation, we also know that this expectation might not come true. It could come true, it could not come true. Like when we buy a lottery, you know that sometimes it would come true, sometimes, usually it has never come true to most of us. Sometimes maybe you're a millionaire, but most of the time it doesn't work. So you have a balanced approach towards your daily life. Now that is Buddhism for daily life. So when you go in your life again, when you make expectations, know that our fundamental mechanism of making expectation is wrong. We discussed that in depth. And because that's wrong, it could be wrong and it could very naturally be shattered. We still make expectations, but we also know that it can be shattered. So we have a balanced approach towards life, simply like making a sand castle on the beach as an adult. We make a perfect, beautiful sand castle, but we know that it could get washed away any moment. So that is how we use expectations, or we build expectations. And how do we take learnings from Buddhism to make expectations? And then the second, so I'm going to speak about another part. What would happen when you lose your expectations? What happens right next to despair or shattered expectations? Now, in order to do that, you might also have seen that I am trying to put labels and trying to categorize your emotions, your feelings. Actually, I'm trying to label and put a name, categorize your mind, right? Why do I do that? It necessarily doesn't have to have a label, but we just call it a label so we can speak about it, we can understand about it. Now, this evening I was speaking to the lady who's part of the conservation of this Barry's Lake, and she's very knowledgeable about all the animals, fauna and flora, birds in this ecosystem. There are so many names. She gave us a book which has over, I don't know, 1,000 different bird species. Now, do they really have names? If you ask a sandhill crane, is your name sandhill crane? There's no such thing like that. It's just a name that we have given the sandhill crane, and before we came here, Indians were probably calling that something else, and the Neanderthals were calling them something else. See, it's just a label that we give. The label is not a permanent thing, but we give that label because we can understand, we can study, and we can use it for our daily life. So similarly, whenever I give you a label for your feeling, for your mind, for the mechanism of mind, it's just a label. It's not an ultimate truth, it's a label. So understanding that is also very important. It's not an ultimate truth, it's a label I'm giving right now for the understanding of our mind. So when I say, when we try to label our feelings, we have we have talked about happiness. And if you look at happiness, I will try to label happiness now. Now, happiness is usually based on external things. So we have external based happiness, which is usually based on attachment. However, you might find, if you have tried it, unattached happiness or happiness based on detachment is actually more happier than the attachment based happiness. I don't know if it's really true for you. So if you want to, you don't have to simply say, okay, you are right to me. You don't have to agree with me. What you can do is you can try to do it and see for yourself. What is more happy and freeing? Attachment based happiness or detachment based happiness? Now, a good example for detachment based happiness is benevolence. Whenever you do a good deed, whenever you give someone in need something, it's more satisfying, it's more gratifying than trying to own something. Because naturally, we discussed earlier, when you own something, you also need to protect it. So there's a lot of things that which comes with it. But when you give something, you simply don't have to protect it. You have given it already. And no one in this world would say anything against you. You're doing a benevolent act. Everyone is okay with it. It's culturally accepted as an okay activity. But you're owning something. Now, if you own a big mansion, people would say, there are millions of people who are hungry. Why do you buy a mansion for yourself? They will say different things about it. But if you give million to some people who are in need, no one would say anything about it. So detachment-based happiness, minimalism-based happiness is more gratifying than attachment-based happiness. But then there's another happiness that you can find if you get into meditation. Now, when you get into meditation, you find different realms of your mind which you would have never seen. Simply like you can fathom or you can understand what heaven looks like from here, from earth. Without really meditating, you cannot understand certain areas of mind or certain states of mind. So you will see that there are states of mind which is absolutely free, absolutely happy, absolutely euphoric and ecstatic. You are full with happiness. Now that state of mind you will understand only when you meditate. However, that is even more happier than simply being benevolent. So you find the attachment based happiness, which is happy but still not as happy as the detachment based happiness. And then you find this happiness that you find or source totally internally through meditation. That's even more happier. But still, this is not Buddhism. This is just a state of mind. So it is not Buddhism. Why am I discussing this? Because it's part and parcel of everyone's life. So some people through their entire life, they only understand the attachment-based happiness. Some find the detachment-based happiness. Some find this other happiness, which is based on meditation and realms, which are not based on externalities at all. And if you take all our feelings and try to put them labels, happy, sad, anger, frustration, etc., one of the worst feelings that you could encounter is anger. Happiness has this range, but if you take all the other emotions, anger is a very negative emotion. It does not do you any good. In fact, just close your eyes and think of a moment that you were angry and how you felt at that moment. It is never a happy place. It is actually not a very peaceful place. You're burning, you're raging, you are furious, you are in flames. So anger is a very negative emotion. So today we are going to discuss about anger. And between anger and happiness, of course, we know anger is bad. And there's a sutra, there's an exposition called the Sankarava Sutra. In this Sankarava Sutra, it says an angry man is like a man who always wear a tinted glasses. I'm trying to modify it to the current day examples. So an angry man is like someone who's wearing a tinted glass. He always see the world through his tint. Now when you are angry, you know, obviously you cannot see clearly. You make so many bad, wrong decisions when you are angry. Even when you get into a simple debate, when you have to speak to your partner, when you are angry, you are reacting in ways that you really shouldn't have. And even the points that you should be putting across in a more constructive manner, you cannot, because you are just firefighting, you are reacting with anger. So anger makes everything messy. It takes out that clarity from your mind, and anger is like basically looking through a tinted glass. I had a boss when I was working earlier, and this boss is quite a nice gentleman. So he was a senior vice president, and everyone was very afraid of him to go to his cabin because he's very tough. He's a very tough cookie. So I found that one day I was sitting in line to meet him, and then there was this other guy who went inside, and then he got hammered left, right. You know, he was getting shouted at. And then I went into the room. I had to get something done, and I knew that I wasn't fully prepared, so I was a little worried as well. I was a little anxious that if he's going to take out that anger on me. But when I went and sat there, he was extremely calm. He was asking me questions which is totally related to my activity. And then I asked him, I was very curious. I asked him, "Sir, I'm a little baffled. The previous guy who was here just a minute ago, you were scolding him. And how are you so calm? How are you so composed talking to me?" And then he gave me a fantastic answer. He has been having a lot of managerial training in Switzerland. I worked for Nestle back in the day, so he has done a bit of management training there in Vevey, Switzerland, and they have gone through numerous programs for management. And in one of these programs, he has found out that we deal with individual chapters. We don't deal with the whole book at a time. We have chapters in our life. So the previous chapter is done and dusted. Now I am dealing with a new chapter. So I do not have to bring the emotion from the previous chapter to this chapter. Now, how do you do it is a whole different thing that we'll have to discuss on a later day. But at least you understand the concept. If we don't bring, or if we don't carry forward, like we carry forward our account balances or annual leave, we do not carry forward anger from one interaction to the other interaction. So when you are angry with your wife or husband, and when you go to work and then try to put it out on your subordinates, that is not going to do any good to your subordinates, to yourself, or to the company, or to the world. So you see, anger has that negative effect. And there's this book in Pali Canon which is called the Dhammapada, which has fantastic, absolutely fantastic short sayings. So in this Dhammapada, there's this Pali word I really like. It goes as Natti Ragasmo Agni, Natti Dosasmo Kali. What it means is that Natti Ragasmo Agni means that there's nothing infuriating, there's nothing harsh as your own desire, the flame of desire. You know, you can burn with your own flame of desire. Natti dosasmo kali. There's nothing destructive like your anger. So no fire, there's no fire like passion or compulsion. At the same time, there's no destruction like anger. So anger is always right next to destruction. No one does good with anger. Well, of course, now having said that, anger is not necessarily bad if you can manage it. Anger can be a great source of motivation also, but only for very handful of people. Most of the people do not use anger as a motivation to do good, but they use anger to do destructive things. So that is one part of anger. And then there's a whole other part of anger, which is the physical effect of anger. We discussed about dopamine earlier, that dopamine is the endocrinial neurotransmitter which gives you that euphoric happy feeling, dopamine. You get the dopamine hit. However, when it comes to anger, there's a whole different set of neurotransmitters in play, epinephrine, or which is known as adrenaline, noradrenaline. Now, these are hormones. Of course, they are very useful, but they are not useful in the long run. If you have seen all those medical movies, whenever someone goes to a cardiac arrest, you give them a little shot, and that shot is adrenaline or epinephrine. What it does is it escalates, or it raises your heartbeat. It raises your breathing, heartbeat, etc. So your heart won't stop, it will be restarted. Now, while it has its own usage, now in a fight or flight situation, if you have to fight or if you have to go away, adrenaline is the savior there. It will give you that extra energy, extra boost, extra nitrous oxide like in a racing car. So you could fight or flight. However, long-term exposure to adrenaline is very damaging. So there's this good friend of mine who's a specialist in gastrointestinal system, and then one day he was saying when he came to our temple that most of the cases that he find about gastrointestine issues like what do you call that, acid refluxes and refluxes, gastritis, etc., they are most of the time connected to some form of a depression or a mental stress more than a real physiological cause. So you put the endoscopy or the colonoscopy, your system physically is fine. However, you have this acid refluxes, gastritis because you're mentally stressed. And a lot of doctors, if you take hypertension, cardiac issues, they are most of the time related with your stress. So you see, anger is in the forefront of damaging our body. Less angry you are, more happy the body is going to be, because it's going to be filled with dopamine or serotonin, which are the good hormones. I'm not saying the adrenaline is a bad hormone, but adrenaline exposure in the long run is not going to be good for us. So then, apart from this physical agony, there's this whole mental agony. And if you look at why do we get angry, in order to show you why do we get angry, I will show you something which is very interesting. This is called the Kubler-Ross effect, or the 5 stages of grieving. Now, I'm sure that most of you have seen it at one point or the other, but whenever we come across a situation, let's say someone's death, when we come across a situation like that, we get into these different states. So I will not go into describing this Kubler-Ross thing in detail. However, that you find usually when you are in a state of hopelessness, when you come across a bad incident in your life, be it a loss of a partner, be it a loss of a personal possession, initially you deny it, but then you get into a mode of anger. So you want to find who caused it, why did it happen this way, who's to be blamed. So usually this blame or this anger comes into play. So as per Kubler-Ross, in 5 stages you find anger in one of these stages. And there's a fantastic sutra called the Salla Sutra. Now Salla means an arrow in Pali. It could mean an arrow or a blade, it could be a blade, it could be an arrow, a sharp prick, anything. So what Salla Sutra says is that a person who does not really understand the mind will be having 2 sorts of sufferings. The first suffering is the physical based suffering. Now, physical based suffering is through the physical stimulations you get, like we were discussing, eye, ear, nose, etc. You get stimulations, you have these ingredients for desire. Through that, you will have a suffering. For example, if someone slaps me, I would have a physical suffering. But then there would be another arrow which should hit you, which is the mental suffering. Now that is what the Salla Sutra says. So you will have 2 types of suffering. One is the physical suffering and the second is the mental suffering. Someone who does not understand the mind would be hit by 2 arrows. Instead of 1 arrow, he will be hit by 2 arrows. So the first, the physical part, and then the mental part. So the next thing that Salla Sutra says is that the only way to get over sadness, or only way to get over some form of a bad state of mind, is through pleasure. If you are sad, the only way to make you happy is to find something which makes you happy, a pleasure. Now, pleasures are based on desire. Desires are essentially based on expectations. We gave it a name the other day called Chanda. Chanda. So, the only way we know how to get over a sadness is through pleasure. Pleasure is associated with desire. Desires are based on expectations. Desires are expectations. Expectations are bound to be shattered. One day or the other, they are bound to be shattered. And when they shatter, we are ended up at the same place that we are in misery. We are in sadness. And in order to get out of sadness, we again seek pleasure. I will also put that in a PowerPoint. I will put that, I will show it how it works. So you have your agony. In order to get over agony, you go to pleasure. You seek pleasure. When you seek pleasure, to seek pleasure, you need desire. Desire is actually pleasure. With desire, you cannot avoid despair. You cannot avoid your expectations getting shattered. And when that happens, you're sad. As a result of sadness, as per Kubler-Ross, we have anger. As a result of anger, we have agony. So this is the wheel or the chakra of samsara, of existence. So I don't know if this brown color line resembles you anything. To me, it resembles a bone. Now why do I say that? Bones, if you take a dog, the dog would try to lick that bone thinking that there's meat in it. However, no matter you lick it, you are not going to get it, your tummy is not going to get full because of that. It's just a bone. It has a smell of meat, but it is not really going to satisfy you. So similarly, people, human who are unaware of your existence and your works of mind, you are continuously licking a bone, thinking that there's going to be something at the end of the day, that there's going to be some form of gratification. However, what happens is you are in the same cycle again and again. You go after your pleasures, you seek pleasures from outside. With these pleasures, you have desires, despair, sadness as a result of shattering them, anger, and agony. So I'm going to give you two more words to this. That there's a word called raga and dvesha in Buddhism. Now, what does raga and dvesha means? Raga is the attraction for things that bring satisfaction. And dvesha is the opposite of raga, aversion towards things that produces unpleasant experiences. So that is raga and dvesha. So I gave you three Pali words: chanda, raga, and dvesha. So we have three words to discuss in future. So raga is the attraction for things that brings us satisfaction. Dvesha is the aversion towards things that produces unpleasant experiences. So now you see that there's this raga, dvesha, and moha. This is actually like a painting. Now in this painting, there is a painter and then there's also a canvas. Why do I say that? We are going to see what is the mechanism in detail at a later point of time. Now we have raga and we have dvesha. You probably think that we have cracked our mind. Well, we really haven't. There's a cause for raga and dvesha also. There's a cause for this liking, lingering, or attachment and aversion. There's a cause for that. We'll get into what that is. Probably this is not the forum for that. Maybe in some other forum. But for Buddhism, for daily life, understanding this is more than enough. Understanding the mechanism of this is more than enough. So probably at a later point, we need to find the painting in detail, paintbrush, and the painter itself. Right. And I would like to bring you another element of this anger, that anger is always personified. Now, why do I say that? When it's a natural occurring, like rain, we are not angry at rain usually. But if it is because of a person, we will be angrier. Of course, we can be angry at weather of seasons and everything, but we usually do not get angry because we know that we do not have control over it. But if it's a person, it could make us more angrier. So you see, I'll take an example. If you knock your pinky toe, a stub toe, right? You're walking along the way and you brush your pinky toe, and when you knock it, when you stub your toe, it's really painful. It is immense. It's very painful. So when that happens, the immediate thing that you would be looking for is that where did I knock my foot and who kept that particular item there? Now, if it's a box, who kept it there? And if it's your daughter or son who kept it there, you would start scolding or you would start shouting, be angry, directing your anger towards that person. But imagine that it's not a rock, it's not something that someone has deliberately kept. It's a rock which was just lying there. Then you are angry, but you cannot really be angry because there's no one to be angry at. So the least you can do is be angry at yourself. Why am I such a klutz? Why am I so clumsy? Now you can start being angry at yourself. So usually anger is always diverted. It's directed to a person. It's directed to a person, the government, the president, or if you cannot find anyone to can't find anyone to blame, you will be blaming yourself. Why did I do that? You are angry at yourself. So we tend to externalize anger most of the time rather than internalizing it. We direct it to people, places, possessions, pastimes, or myself rather than internalizing it. Now, can we unpersonify anger? Now, that's a question that we need to see. That's the answer that we need to find. Can we somehow unpersonify our anger? If we look at the things which are happening, or if we adopt a mindset to see things as a causality, it's just someone kept it there as a result of a cause. So it's just a causality. If we start adopting that mindset, we are just going to look at that interaction or that event as we see the seasons. Seasons is a causality. There's some rotation in the sun, some unknown reason that world works this way. So it's just happening. So someone deliberately kept a box where I brushed my pinky toe, I stubbed my pinky toe. It's a causality. So if we try to unpersonify our daily experiences, maybe you can get out of this anger. But if you try to personify it, if you try to put some blame on someone else, the anger is going to grow more and more. But if you unpersonify it, maybe you will have an opening to reduce that anger. But the more important question is, the mental pain and physical pain because of this anger, why does it happen? Now, why do we get angry? Now, we have a hint of why do we get angry. But if we go into detail, we know that anger is also mental fabrication. It's another feeling that we have painted ourselves. And how do we paint this painting for ourselves is that we are essentially creatures of habit. Now, back in the day, I was in a temple in a remote area of Sri Lanka. There was a cat in that temple. That cat is very mischievous. He's actually not living in the temple. He's a neighboring cat. He would always come to the temple and eat out of the dishes when it's served for monks. Before the monks come and consume that food, the cat would come and then he would try to steal that food. So the head monk there, he is a very kind person, but he has this broomstick where he throws at the cat. So the cat has gotten so used to that incident, but cat never stops it also. He comes every day. He has gotten so used to it, when the head monk comes with the broomstick, he just flees. You don't have to even throw it. Even when I take the broomstick, he just goes away. He knows that it's his cue to run away now. So why I said that is that B.F. Skinner, who you probably have heard of B.F. Skinner, who's a behavioral psychologist, who brought out his famous Skinner's dog. So he has found that we are creatures of habit, and then we have certain trigger points. We have certain conditions that we work on. And then also when it comes to anger, or when it comes to any habit, that we also have a range of being habitual. What do I mean by that? If we take a if we take the range of happiness or range of habits, we have preferences. After preferences, we have interests. Now, there are certain things that I prefer, but then it becomes a little more bigger. It has this snowball effect of becoming an interest. And then it becomes a liking, where I really like it. And then it becomes a habit, and then it becomes an addiction. Addiction is where you do not have control over it. But if you see from preference, interest, liking to habit to addiction, it has this snowball effect of becoming bigger. So similarly that anger also follows the same path. Anger is a habit. Like we are creatures of habit, anger is also a habit. Now I will tell you why anger is a habit. Like every habit has a trigger point and action, anger also has a trigger point. Before going there, I will show what Skinner found out with his dog. He found out that these dogs can be conditioned. Now, if you do not know Skinner's original experiment, so there's this dog who has food, but he also has a stimulus of a whistle. Now, these things are not related. So, this is a neutral stimulus. It does not have any response from the dog. However, Skinner did something. Whenever he gave food to the dog, whenever he fed the dog, he also blew his whistle. And then after some time, that very neutral stimulus was conditioned so that dog was salivating. He was full of saliva. He knows that right after the whistle sound, the food is going to come. So he got conditioned. And this is how usually you train a dog, right? And this is how teachers train students. This is how the wife trains the husband. This is how people get trained. This is how people get conditioned. This is how the society trains individuals, the civics. So we get trained that way, we get into habits that way. So anger also follows the same path. We have certain trigger points. And it is very interesting that when we understand these trigger points, we will understand that the trigger point originally is only a neutral stimulus, like that dog's whistle. It's a neutral stimulus. However, because we conditioned, we fabricated this artificial feeling, now it is an anger which is out of our control, which does all this bad to us. So in Sri Lanka again, you find these progressions, pageants. These pageants which are done around the temple of Tooth Relics, one of the most sacred places in Sri Lanka. The epitome, the climax of this pageant is the elephant, and on that decorated elephant, huge elephant, there's the sacred tooth relic of Buddha. So before that climax of the pageant, there's a whole lot of things happening in the forefront. So there's a guy who goes with a whipping whip. He whips and makes this sound, and then there are drums. They let us know that the tooth relic is coming. But the tooth relic is coming after about 2-3 kilometers of pageant. So many dancing items, etc., etc. Then comes the tooth relic. So anger is also like that pageant. Before anger, you see certain signs. Anger doesn't come immediately to you. So you see certain pre-signs. Like in any disease, before heart attack, you have you see certain symptoms, you see certain signs. So anger also has these signs. However, because you are not trained, you do not look at your mind in a particular way. You simply cannot understand these signs, these warning signals. You cannot see them because they are so fast. What you see is the tooth relic. You see the anger, you see the climax right away without seeing these early warning signals, early warning signs. But if you train your mind to see these early warning signals, if you train and understand your mind to see these conditions and neutral stimuluses, which then creates anger, then you will also know a way to get out of anger. Now, what's wrong of not knowing that is that if you again reflect the last time that you were angry, just for a moment, sit back and think the last time that you were angry. When you were angry and when you reacted, did you have a choice for that reaction? Some people would say, yes, I had a choice, but most of the time, you do not have a choice when you are angry and when you react to that anger. Just think of the last time that you were really furious, angry, like very angry, not mildly angry. So during that anger and your reaction, you usually do not have a choice. But it says in the Pali Canon again, an enlightened person, a person who understands his own mind, he has options. He can act according to the condition, or he can opt to act in a different way. Why? Because he is no more a slave. So let me bring you another interesting quote by Carl Jung. Carl Jung is right next to Sigmund Freud, an analytical psychologist. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it the fate. So, with all your feelings, be it anger, be it this compulsive desire, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. It will take the way it want to take you, and you will call it fate. So you are essentially a slave of your own emotions. You are not a free man. So what do we do to become free, find our freedom? First, we need to understand and be conscious about these things. Second, after this consciousness, you need to dig deep and see what is the mechanism. And then you are going to find how to let go of that link which keeps us in a loop, break that loop, break that vicious cycle, and get out of the loop. Hence, be liberated. Right. So, with that, I will also try to do a bit of meditation, reflective meditation with you today. But before that, I will also tell you a few things which will help in that meditation. Imagine a scenario where you're walking down road and suddenly something comes and hits the back of your head. And when you look behind, you see that there's a stone. Someone has there's a stone and your head is aching. So it's most likely that the stone struck your head. If you see that there's a enemy who someone who doesn't like you, someone who's a foe has threw that rock, you would be mad. But if you look back and see, when you look behind, that it's not an enemy, it's just a little child whom you dearly love. You will be angry, but you will not be that angry as if it was an enemy. It will also depend. If it's a very powerful man, if it's say a very powerful man in the country, he threw the rock, you will be mad, but you know that you cannot do anything about it. So you would even say, sorry that I got hit by the rock. You could even say that. If it's someone who you think you can crush, maybe your reaction would be different. Now, of course, I'm just trying to stereotype it, but each and everyone has different reactions to it. So I'm trying to generalize it. But take a scenario that if you know that when you look behind, it's someone that you can scold and be angry, you can express your anger, you will be expressing that anger. But if you see that if it's someone that whom you cannot express your anger, classic example, a monk. Now, monks are supposed to be venerated. We have even this prefix in front of our name, venerable. Now, usually, even if we do something which makes someone angry, they wouldn't express the anger because because we are venerables. So, to a monk, you would usually talk back and be harsh, show your anger. He or she would be hiding that anger, even maybe not be angry. Like when a child is something, you are not angry. So similarly, your anger depends on the person. And kids' anger, if you take a kid, regardless of who threw the rock, he would be equally angry. Whether it's the president of the country, whether it's its friend, or whether it's its enemy, he's indifferent to that. He does not categorize anger like an adult would do. So, because we do this, we know that anger is a fabricated thing, like the desire, like the like and dislike. It's a very conceptual feeling, fabricated feeling. However, the more important thing is we only see world through our eyes. That's the of course we can see the world through our eyes, but by that I do not mean the literal eyes, the physical eye. We always have our perspective, and in that perspective, I'm always right. So I live in a bubble and I do not see it from someone else's perspective. So whenever I do something, I think I'm doing the right thing. I do not do a wrong thing. Even if I do a wrong thing, I know that doing the wrong thing is the right thing, right? I don't know if you get that. So basically, when I do something, I do it thinking that I am right, and that is the only way that I can see, unless if someone points it out to me. If I cannot understand what the other person is pointing out, or if I'm not in a state of mind to accept what other person is pointing out, I see it as the right way. So everyone has their right to be right. And why I say that, as a monk, I have been, even yesterday, I was listening to an account of a husband and a wife. Husband is complaining to me about his wife. Wife is also complaining to me about the husband. Now they gave me two different calls, and these two calls, the wife was complaining to me about the husband is complaining to me about the wife. And it just happened yesterday or this morning, I think. But when I listen to their stories, I think both of them are right. They're both right. There's no one wrong person. So when I'm speaking to the husband, I usually tell him, "You are absolutely right. In your eyes, you are absolutely correct." And when I'm talking to the wife, I say, "You are right." Now it would look like that I'm a bad person. I'm trying to be in both of their good books. But actually, I understand, in their set of mind, in their frame, in their bubble, that individual is right. So what I usually try to do is that I also try to give him a different perspective. See, although you think you have the right to be right in the way that you think, this other person has a different right. Or she lives in a different bubble. So what if you try to get into their shoes and think from their angle? So some people are intelligent enough to do that, but most of the people, they are not so intelligent. They do not wish to get into someone else's shoe and then look at the world from someone else's shoe. They only think my shoe is the correct shoe and I look at the right thing. Anyway, now when people are doing us things, let's say that we personify anger, and we are angry because of something a person has done to us. Now in his shoe, he did the right thing. Although in our shoe it's wrong, he did the right thing in his shoe. And there's also saying that anger is the punishment you give yourself for other people's behaviors or mistakes. Now, why do I say mistake? Why do I say a punishment? When you are angry, first thing, you have this physical, endocrinological, adrenaline, noradrenaline affecting you. Second is that you have this mental agony. Anger is not a good state of mind. Happiness is a good state of mind, at least. Anger is not so. So, do you really want to be in that state of mind and punish yourself for someone else's activity which he or she did, thinking that he is right? And we know, of course, in our shoe it's wrong, but in his shoe he was right. So are we going to just consider it as a causality? It happened because that person was misinformed. It is a causality. If we try to adopt that mindset, we don't have to personify that anger, or we do not have to punish ourselves. Forget the reaction that we do. We do not have to simply punish that person or punish ourselves because of someone else's behavior. So, if you might find that this is all theoretical, but let me tell you, this is not at all theoretical. Myself, I have done a lot of good things as well. I have done a lot of bad things which makes people angry, especially with girls in my younger days, because I was not a good boyfriend usually, and they get super mad at me. And whenever that happens, of course, I am to be blamed most of the time, and there were instances where even I was not to be blamed, and they did certain harsh activities. They did some very bad things on me. But I can tell you something. I personally am not angry at anyone in this world. Recently, even very recently, a lot of people did bad things on me. There are things that people do to me all the time. But even that person who's most mad at me, who does all the negative things to me, I am not angry at that person. And for some reason, even before becoming a monk, it has always been the case with me. I will never be angry at any person. No person can make me angry. And I find it fantastic. I find it really good because I am not punishing myself. Because I'm not angry at anyone, no one in this world can disturb me or harm me. Now, back in the day, I remember there was this relative, relatives, they have these grudges and all. So, my mother, for example, makes grudges with relatives all the time. So, she has her good relatives and the bad relatives. Certain relatives she doesn't even speak to. But I do not care about that. I speak to all these relatives. And one day, there was an instance I forgot to accidentally invite a relative of mine to my wedding. So that relative was angry about it, and then she said, "Well, I'm not going to invite you to mine." So she was mad. And then I found that I honestly made a mistake, and she's really mad at me. I said, "Well, even if you don't invite, I'm going to anyway gate crash your wedding." And I went. And when I was going, my parents, my wife, they asked me, "Aren't you ashamed to go and do that? They have clearly asked you not to come because they are mad at you. Aren't you ashamed to do that?" I said, "I simply do not have that element of shame. I have no shame because that person was mad because an activity, a causality, it was an honest mistake, and he's mad, she's mad. But if I respond with the same anger to that person, it's only going to have that snowball effect and then get aggravated. But if I lend a hand and say, I am not mad at you. Frankly, I was not angry at that person. I understood it as a causality. And when I did that, a lot of people advise me against things that I do. Aren't you ashamed to do it? Aren't you ashamed to even come and speak to me? I am not ashamed because I am not punishing myself and I am not punishing anyone else. I am simply nothing in this world can make me angry of another person. It doesn't necessarily, now having said that, it doesn't mean that I am totally out of likes and dislikes. Of course, there are people that I like, I prefer more, and I do not prefer. For example, I do not prefer people, I do not like people who are malicious, who are having malicious intentions, who are damaging the environment, who are not benevolent. I don't like them. I like people who are benevolent, kind, etc. However, just because someone is not benevolent, just because someone is behaving in a way that is damaging the environment, the society, I am not angry at that person. I understand he has a reason. In his shoes, he is doing the right thing. So when I get to his shoes, I obviously understand why he is doing what he is doing. So because of that, I am not angry. And so that is one thing about it. And another reason for that, why I cannot be angry, is I know how to practically to let go of my anger. But in order to let go of my anger, you really need to understand how to let go of your desires. So this is not just Pali canon sitting on a book, it is a practical lifestyle. You can test me. Now you don't have to believe me, you can test me. You can poke and see if I get angry, or if you can take away something from me, you can see if I'm desirous about it. And then I think another important factor in this whole process is mindfulness. But what is mindfulness? How do we get there? It's not for today. But I will now tell you a small meditation that we can do. It's called the meditation of Maitri. Maitri means literally friendship. Now, what is the opposite of friendship? Animosity, the enemies that you have. So, when you are not an enemy, when you do not have enemies, everyone is a friend. So, that is Maitri meditation or compassion meditation. Maitri means a friend. So, how do we do that? It has 4 Pali verses. I will anyway mention it if you don't understand Pali, but I will anyway mention because it sounds nice. The first one is aham avero homi, which means that you have anger inside, long-term animosity inside you. Why animosity? We discussed why we can get angry of certain things. We personify it, we make expectations shatter naturally, and then we are angry. So aham avero homi means I am simply not angry at anyone. I do not have that animosity. Now, saying that wishful thinking is one, but really doing it is a whole different thing. But anyway, we are trying to see if we can really let go of our anger and animosity to the enemies we have right now. So if you have any enemies right now, just try to see if you can be friends with them. How can you forgive them? So ahang aviro homi. Abhya pacha homi means that you have this short, quick temper, and that animosity snowballs into anger. Now, that anger we discussed earlier, it's damaging physically, it's damaging mentally. And how do we let go of it? How do we now? Ahang avero abhya pacho always means that I'm not going to be. I'm going to be out of that anger. I'm going to be out of that animosity. How do you do that? We discuss the mechanics of that. How we are creatures of habit, and how does these habits occur, what are the conditions. Although I did not discuss it in detail, this is the test, this is the practical that you can do in your practical daily life. See what are the trigger points, see what are the habits, what are the patterns of habits, what are the neutral stimuluses which have become angry responses now. So abhyapachya means that I understand these habits, and because of that I let go, I simply detach from my anger. Anigo homi is that I also I'm letting go of my agitations. Sukhi attanam pariharami. Because I can do all these things practically, I am having a peaceful mind, hence a peaceful body. Simple as that. Now that thing I can vouch, because I know I am not I'm not angry with anyone. I do not have enemies. Probably they are enemies with me, because I can change their mind, but I am not angry or mad at anyone. I do not have enemies. Maybe to them I am an enemy, but to me they are not an enemy. So because of that, I know the peace of mind I have. Because when you don't have enemies, when you are always surrounded by friends, you cannot be unhappy. It cannot make you angry. So in our Sukhi Attanam Pariharami, it means because of all this, you enjoy a life, an existence of a peaceful mind, a peaceful body. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta. Now, I know what it is like, and may all beings understand and find this happiness and peace because you let go of your animosity, anger, and agitation. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. So what you can do is, for a few minutes, you can all close your eyes and get into this guided meditation with me. So close your eyes, sit in a comfortable position, take a deep breath inside, fill your lungs all the way in, and then take a deep exhalation. Let go of all that air from your body. Repeat it again. Deep inhale and deep exhalation. Deep inhale again and exhalation. Now find the normal breathing you have, but be aware of your breathing. You inhale and you exhale. This time is dedicated for meditation. Just a few minutes, just a couple of minutes, and nothing is going to disturb us during this time. It's all the guided meditation. Maitri is opposite of animosity, enmity. I'm friends with everyone. I'm friends with foes. I'm friends with neutral. I'm friends with friends. I'm friends with myself. Aham averu homi. May I be free from this enmity that I have. If I have any enemy in my life, if I have the simplest, least enmity in my life, I'm going to let go of that enmity right now. Aham averu homi. Abhya pacho homi. May I be free from the suffering of anger, the malevolence. I'm letting go of this anger because of this enmity. Anigo homi. I do not have enmity. I do not have enemies in my life. I do not have anger in my life. And I do not have an uncontrollable rage. Therefore, may I be free from rage. Sukhi attanam pariharami. Because I have let go of my enmity, my anger, my rage, I can take care of myself happily, both mentally and physically. Sukhi attanam pariharami. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta. I've let go of my anger, enmity, rage, and because of that, my mind is so free, my mind is so happy, it's so filled with positivity, friendship, maitri. May all beings find their physical and mental solace like I did. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta. Aham averu homi. May I be free from enmity. The last enemy that I have in my mind, I'm letting go of that enmity now. I do not have any enemies. Why? Because I understand the relativity, the fabrication of this animosity. Abhyapacho homi. May I be free from the suffering of anger. I do not have enemies, hence I do not have anger. Anigo homi. May I be free from rage. When everyone is a friend, there's no reason for rage. Sukhi Attanam Pariharami. Now that I'm absent of rage, fury, anger, and enmity, my mind and my body is as calm as it could be. Sabbe Satta Bhavantu Sukhitatta. May all beings find their physical and mental solace, like I am doing right now. I share no enmity. I have no feelings of anger towards my enemies, towards neutral people, towards my friends, or towards myself, because I understand the mechanism and the fabrication of a very relative feeling, a very relative habit called anger. You may now inhale, take a deep breath, fill your lungs, and with that exhalation, if there's the least amount of enmity, anger, you let that out of your system, out of your body, and out of your mind. You may open your eyes now, and that is our meditation of friendship, Maitri meditation. So, with that, I will end the discussion for today. And next week we'll meet at 7:10 p.m. So you don't have to wait until we finish this. So 7:10 p.m. next week, and then we will understand another feeling which is called fear, which is right next to anger, which is fear. So with that, may the Triple Gem bless you.